Today we're going to talk about the serve and a few things that are very important to develop. One is the use of our wrist snap, and it's something that I don't want to confuse with wristing the serve or just using the wrist independently for the serve. But if we look at the kinetic chain in a serve, as the racket comes through, there's wrist snap that's necessary before the follow through. And we have to have a bit of strength in order to do that. You can't stiff arm a serve, and what happens if you do that and you're coming through your shoulder, we kind of run down the back of the ball, and it's very hard to control the contact point. The wrist, much more natural, just like throwing a ball. And what I suggest is that we develop some strength in that wrist by bringing the racket up, tossing the ball, and just lightly hitting it downward with our hand. Now, this isn't necessarily a toss for a serve. All we're doing is an exercise so that we're developing this little wrist snap. Now, I'm using the Continental Grip, and that's very important to develop. A lot of people are using the semi-western or even the eastern, but look what happens when I use my wrist snap. I'll drop the racket down. I'm making contact in my arm as I'm snapping, and this is where we're really losing the potential in our serve. If we use any other grip than the Continental, it's very hard to allow the racket to exit out the side or the back. The Eastern, you can get away with it. With the semi-Western or this pancake, it's very hard to do, and we're swinging with the racket in a vertical position, and that vertical position, if we hit wrong, we're just driving the ball down. The Continental, straight up and down. Sounds funny, but how about this? Let's look at it from a different point of view for someone who right now is saying, oh, that's too difficult to do. Well, if I took my hand out like I'm doing a volleyball serve and I strike the ball, no different. You know, I'm just hitting the ball flat with my hand. Let's put the racket in my hand while it's flat out in front. Well, look at this. That same stroke to strike the volleyball, if I put the racket in my hand as I'm coming through, you can see that the racket is not straight above my hand, it's out to the side. That is the correct position for the racket as it's coming through, as we're striking that ball. It's not a direct line off of my arm, it's slightly angled. So let's go back and talk about that wrist snap again. I'm just tossing the ball out in front of me. I need to keep the racket out in front beforehand. Don't worry, your arm, your hand, your wrist is quite quick to do this motion. It's not necessary to have it back and then rush there. You have plenty of time to bring it back and forward again. We're doing this lightly. We're tossing the ball out in front of us, and we're striking down with very little movement in our forearm here. There shouldn't be too much stress, but if this is new for you, yes, you're probably going to be sore. We're using a group of muscles that in tennis, we typically don't strengthen that forearm. In one of my other videos, we talked about the supination pronation. This is very important. We need to be able to get this wrist snap as an exercise. We're not serving with this, but it's an exercise because in the kinetic chain of our serve, it's necessary that we have a wrist snap as part of the serve. We're also developing the ability to make contact with the ball with the Continental Grip. As I turn my hand out, I've got the racket now in a position. So I'm turning my hand out, the racket's in a position where I can make contact with it, and I'm simply working on that wrist snap. Here we go again. And I'm driving it down. Now, one of the other things that I run into with my students is typically the path of their preparation in their swing. They fail to raise the arm up, and what happens is I think there was a technique, or there was a belief when they saw service motion that racket goes way back, and at this point they start bringing it up too low. Look at my elbow, it never quite got up. Now I am still using the Continental Grip, and I'll continue to use it for the demonstration. It's the grip that I want you to use. The pros, if you watch them, use a path for the racket that I call climbing the fence. In their backswing, they bring the racket back against the fence and they climb the fence and through. But let me get back to my point about lifting the elbow. Milos Raonic is a great example of a position that you can turn the racket that forces you to raise the elbow. If I just come back and bring the racket back, my elbow is not rising, and I'm dependent on bringing it up at this point before I roll the racket over and then snap forward into my serve. But how about this? Let's take the racket and we're actually going to turn the racket over. This may be a little bit extreme, but if you look at my wrist, I'll turn this way. I've gone from Continental and I'm just turning the racket over like I'm holding a pan over a fire. Well, guess what this does? Mechanically in your arm, as you draw it back, it forces you to bring the elbow back. I have no choice. It's the biomechanics of our arm. If I don't do that, it's very easy for me to leave my elbow low. If I do turn it over, I have to bring my elbow up higher, and it puts me in a position that by the time I get back, I roll the racket over. I've got my wrist open as I come forward to serve, and then as I contact, wrist snap and through. So the two tips here that I want you to take away are developing that wrist snap with a Continental Grip. Hold the racket up in front of you like an umbrella, but it's over your friend that's standing in front of you. Toss the racket up and just start working on wrist snap. And then as you start to go into your serve, take that racket and let's turn it over a little bit. It doesn't have to be so extreme like Milos Raonic, but turn it over a little bit so that as you bring it back, imagine hitting the fence, I'm coming up, and then I'm following through with a little bit of wrist snap. Let's see if we can work on that, and I'll give you more tips as we develop that.